The major signings may be over, but the Jets keep adding depth in free agency. We're going to talk about the latest additions to the New York Jets on today's episode of the Locked On Jets podcast.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Thursday, March 17th, 2022, and I'm your host, John B. from GangreneNation.com. Thanking you so much for making this show your first listen or your first watch every day. We are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. If you like what you see or hear, hit that subscribe button. You'll never miss an episode. If you're watching on YouTube, please give it a thumbs up. It helps this channel out, and it helps other Jets fans find Locked On Jets. Well, there have been some very distinct themes each day of free agency for the New York Jets so far in 2022. Monday was about filling the holes on the offensive side of the ball. Tuesday, the attention turned to the defense, especially the secondary. And Wednesday, I think it was really about depth. The Jets added a number of players, they retained a number of players, and these are not foundational players that the Jets added. These are more guys who are going to help the depth out, or at least you hope they will help the depth out. And we're going to talk about some of these players on today's episode of Locked On Jets. Now, I think arguably the biggest move that was made yesterday was at the tight end position. And the Jets acquire Tyler Conklin, a former member of the Minnesota Vikings, had over 600 yards this past season. Guy who did not play much his first couple years in the league. Last year was really the first time he stepped onto the stage and had a fairly productive season as a receiver. The Jets get him on a 3-year deal worth $21 million. At least those are the initial reports. We'll see what comes out. We'll figure out what the structure is in the days and weeks ahead. But a second investment for the Jets at the tight end position this offseason after they agreed to terms with CJ Uzomah of Cincinnati the other day. And I said it on Monday, or I said it on Tuesday's show, that the Uzomah deal is one of those deals where it depends on how much emphasis you put on the tight end position. Because if your view is that you cannot run this offense without a competent tight end, then you can argue CJ Uzomah is worth $8 million. And the fact the Jets have now invested in a second tight end, I think it shows you the premium they're placing at this position. And listen, I was going crazy early in the season when the Jets were constantly running 12 personnel. And 12 personnel means one running back, two tight ends. If you ever hear a number describing the personnel, the first digit is the number of running backs on the field. The second is the number of tight ends. So 21 would be two running backs, one tight end. The Jets were running a lot of 12 personnel, one running back, two tight ends early in the 2021 season. And it never made a lot of sense because you had guys like Tyler Kroft and Ryan Griffin and Trevon Wesco. You did not have forget about quality tight ends. You really did not have competency at the tight end position. And the fact that the Jets have now made two fairly significant signings in free agency, I mean, that shows me that they really want, at their core, to run a lot of two tight end sets in this offense. And it's a zone-based running scheme, and you kind of need mobile guys to run a zone scheme. And it's also kind of what's known as an outside zone scheme. That means the running plays typically going to the outside. So you have tight ends on the edge of the line. They can be a big assistance in the blocking game. As the season moved on last year, the Jets kind of got away from running 12 personnel. I think they figured out that they didn't really have good tight ends. So this shows a clear commitment at the position. Was this a good signing? I mean, I think it's an okay signing. I don't think it's this slam dunk great signing. I think a lot of it comes down to whether Conklin can sustain his level of production. Now, I talked about the role of blocking when we're talking about the tight end position in this offense. I don't know what Conklin's really going to provide as a blocker. I don't think he's a great blocker. I don't think his track record suggests he's a great blocker. I don't think his frame suggests he's going to be that good of a blocker. But as a tight end too, you don't necessarily need great blocking out of that guy. I mean, you have CJ Uzomah, who's also not a great blocker, but not a terrible blocker. You don't necessarily need the greatest blocking. You probably need an upgrade over what the Jets had. I view Conklin as more kind of a receiving threat, though, and he seems like more of what's known as an H-back type of guy, where It's a little smaller. He's probably going to be used more in the passing game. He's not overly fast. I don't think he's a field stretcher, but he did post over 600 yards this past season. He kind of looked like an ascending player. Like a lot of these moves, it's not risk-free, but you kind of get what the Jets are doing here. It's a clear sign of the direction they want to take this offense. So not hard to see what they're doing. And I got to tell you, looking at the tight end position heading into this offseason, especially after the franchise tags were given out to some of the top-end targets, there was no great tight end available. So, I mean, if you told me the Jets had to invest at the tight end position, I kind of prefer the idea that they split the money across two guys, because you're not dealing with anybody who really deserves to be paid, rather than what you could easily do, which is just drastically overpay one guy. And I think it's almost like a situation where you could argue that the number one tight end on the Jets, whoever it is, and it could be Uzomah, it could be Conklin, the number one tight end for the Jets is probably a little below average, and the number two tight end is probably above average for a number two tight end. So I guess if you're running a bunch of two tight end sets, this maybe balances out a little bit, where, all right, you're a little bit below the average, whichever guy you consider your first tight end, but whoever's the second tight end is better than your typical second tight end. So it's, I guess, tight end equilibrium, we'll call it. An interesting move. And the other thing I kind of like about this is it means you don't have to draft somebody. I feel like this now means that you can still draft a tight end, and tight ends don't really make a big impact as rookies typically, because there's a lot to learn at the position. You got to learn inline blocking, you got to learn the tight end routes, you got to learn the slot routes, you got to learn the outside receiver routes. This is actually a pretty good year for the Jets to draft a tight end, even though they have now two guys, because you can now draft somebody and let them come along at their own pace, and then maybe in a year or two take over. Uzomah's pushing 30. So it prevents the Jets from needing to draft a tight end, because if you're running a bunch of 12 personnel and you only have one tight end, you kind of go into the draft thinking, I got to get somebody. So from that standpoint, I think, this strategically, and we'll see how this move works out, but the thinking behind it is something I can understand. I can see the fit. And, Conklin was a very popular player in the Vikings fan base, so we'll see what we get from him. If he continues on his trajectory, we're heading for a pretty decent contract here. But, we'll see. I think I see the logic behind the move. We'll see how good the player is once he arrives with the Jets. Now, another move the Jets made is they signed Jacob Martin, a Texans edge rusher, to a 3-year deal, $13.5 million total. Ian Rappaport broke the story, $6 million guaranteed. Another guy to add to the pass rush. I think my guess is he kind of takes the role Vinny Curry was supposed to have. The Jets signed the veteran Curry last year from the Eagles. He was supposed to be kind of like a part-time player who came in on passing downs, and he got hurt and never played. He was old. I have to admit, I was really pumped when the Jets signed Vinny. Vinny Curry was like one of those guys I always wanted the Jets to get. And of course, they get him when he really can't play anymore. So now they went a little bit younger. And that's the thing about these two signings, Conklin and Martin. They're both 26. So you're going on the younger side of things. And that's, I think, typically better in free agents. Now, if you look at Martin's career, he was drafted by the Seattle Seahawks and then was traded to the Texans. He was kind of like a throw-in when the Seahawks traded for Jadeveon Clowney a few years ago, and has developed into a pretty nice pass rusher for the Houston Texans. Our buddy Michael Nani of JetsXFactor.com posted some numbers that he's got a pressure rate around 11%, which is above average. So, this is probably not going to be a guy who's going to be a starter. I think, a little undersized given where the Jets are for him to be in the starting lineup, but somebody who's more of a depth player, and that's really what I think the last day or so has been for the Jets. It's been about trying to improve your depth, and I think in some areas they've done better than others. I think, tight end, they now have a quality second tight end for when they want to run their double tight end sets, and I think Martin helps improve the pass rush. And last year, it was kind of a nightmare year for the Jets on the pass rush because you lost Carl Lawson in training camp, and you lost Vinny Curry pretty much for the season before he even put on a Jets uniform. So you're trying to kind of rebuild that thing. You're trying to improve the depth. I think, one of the lessons of Vinny Curry is maybe you want to go a little bit younger when you're talking about a situational pass rusher. And Martin certainly does that. So young depth the Jets are adding here. Those are the two most significant ones. And I think that both of these moves do improve the depth on this team. Now, of course, there's no position that's more important for depth than the quarterback position. There's no position that's more important in general than quarterback. And the Jets made a pair of moves yesterday, one of which I'm a little skeptical of, the other of which makes sense to me, and it's a guy who may not get a fair chance. And I'll explain all of this ahead here on this Thursday episode of the Locked On Jets podcast. Of course, we are in the NFL offseason. The Jets are adding players in free agency. The draft is coming up soon. But college basketball's tournament is finally upon us. And locally, if you were watching last night, an absolute heartbreaker for the Rutgers Scarlet Knights, making their second straight NCAA tournament appearance, falling in a couple overtimes to Notre Dame. I mean, I'm sorry to all you Rutgers fans out there, but you should know that as the tournament continues today, that from all the latest odds, contests, and player props, BetOnline.net is the number one source for all your sports betting needs and info. BetOnline remains the best spot for all of your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. And it's not just basketball. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sports wagering information needs, including live betting and your favorite Vegas casino games. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action. BetOnline, where the game starts. Thank you for making Locked On Jets your first listen or your first watch every day. We are free and available on all platforms. And if you're watching on YouTube, please give this episode a thumbs up. It helps the channel out tremendously, and it helps other Jets fans find this podcast. Well, today we're talking about the depth moves that the Jets made on Wednesday, and no position is more important when it comes to depth than the quarterback position. A backup quarterback, or the lack of a quality backup quarterback, can make or break your season. And the Jets added a pair of backup quarterbacks. Not so much added, but decided to retain the services of a pair of backup quarterbacks yesterday. Mike White, the hero of the Cincinnati game with his 405-yard performance in his first start, was a restricted free agent, and the Jets gave him a tender. And what's a tender? Well, if you're a restricted free agent, your team can offer you a one-year contract. And if your team does not offer you a one-year contract, you become an unrestricted free agent. You can sign anywhere you want. If your team, as a restricted free agent, offers you a one-year contract, they retain certain rights over you. You're still free to go to other teams and negotiate a deal. But if you negotiate a deal with another team, your original team, which in this case for Mike White would be the Jets, could match any offer. And depending on the size of the one-year contract you get, if your original team, again for Mike White, the Jets, decides not to match the offer, they could be entitled to draft pick compensation. I feel like one of those lawyer commercials when I say that. You could be entitled to draft pick compensation. But the Jets gave Mike White a one-year tender. It is for around $2.5 million. If he signs it, he's with the Jets another year. He'll be a free agent next year. If he seeks out a deal from another team, the Jets will have a chance to match that offer. If the Jets choose not to match that offer because of the size of the one-year offer the Jets gave Mike White, they could get a fifth-round pick in return. And the other move the Jets made was they retained the services of the veteran quarterback, Joe Flacco. Flacco signs a one-year deal worth $3.5 million. And you know something? I've been thinking this through. And if you've been listening to the show, I've been saying, well, maybe the Jets should trade Mike White because they don't believe in him, because that game against Miami, they started Flacco. You know what? I'm going way too easy on the Jets. What the Jets have done at the backup quarterback position is, in some ways, pretty illogical, in my view. No more Flacco. I've been saying no more Flacco for a long time. I am well aware that Joe Flacco was a very good quarterback with the Ravens. I'm well aware he's got experience. I'm well aware he won a Super Bowl. The Jets should not be paying Joe Flacco for production that he had with another team, for production another team benefited from a decade ago. Joe Flacco's past the point where he can help a team. He did not play well in the one game he had this year against Miami. Yeah, the numbers look okay because Elijah Moore made one big play. You take that play out, which was made by Elijah Moore, Flacco didn't really do anything. And Flacco hasn't won a game in like 3 years. He won 2 games with Denver starting quarterback 3 years ago. That's his latest win. He had his latest 2 wins. He's 0-5 as a Jets starting quarterback. It's over for Joe Flacco, and yet the Jets are giving him $3.5 million. And it's not just that they're giving him $3.5 million. They're not giving Mike White a chance. Listen, if the Jets are not going to go out there and spend on a backup quarterback and go out and get a top guy, why not give Mike White a chance? I'm letting them off the hook for not believing in Mike White. Well, if you're not going to come up with a viable alternative, why not give him a shot? I mean, what has Flacco done lately that even comes close to the 405-yard performance Mike White had against the Bengals. And the rumors seem to be that the Jets are going to look to trade Mike White. And I could see it if, like, you went with a better option. If you went out there and spent money on a backup quarterback, fine. But why are we going with Flacco again? Why are we, like, falling back on these cliches of veteran leadership and get a guy who can play? This is one that I'm sorry, I cannot agree with the Jets' handling of the backup quarterback situation. And this is from somebody who, like, for months was talking about how deeply in trouble the Jets would be if Mike White had to play. Last offseason, I couldn't believe they were going with Mike White. So I'm in training camp, so I'm in preseason. Heading into that game against Cincinnati, I was pretty vocal. I thought they had no shot in that game. Well, he surprised me. And maybe Mike White can't play. Maybe that was just like a one-time deal for Mike White. But if you're only going to get a fifth-round pick in return, and based on the offer the Jets gave Mike White, that's kind of the ceiling of what they can expect. Fifth-round pick's really not very valuable. You might as well give this guy a shot. I don't see what the problem with that is. I don't see why we are so focused on. Is it because, I mean, Joe Douglas was a scout who scouted Flacco with the Ravens. And I feel like Flacco's been on the team for 3 years now because of that. Listen, maybe he's a good voice in the locker room. Maybe he's a good guy to have around Zach Wilson. Well, hire him as a coach then. He doesn't need $3.5 million as a player, because I don't think he can win games if the Jets call upon him. He hasn't won. He's had 5 starts the last 2 years. He hasn't won a game. And you're not giving a young guy a shot. You're not giving a young guy who went out there and performed. You're essentially saying, like, you're not getting a shot. I have an issue with this. I don't like the way the Jets are handling the backup quarterback position. Not like it's going to do anything, but I have to say, I do think I've been letting the Jets off too easy. I've been saying, well, this is how the Jets, well, maybe the Jets shouldn't feel that way. If you're not going to take the backup quarterback's position seriously and go out and get, go out and get one of the bigger names as a backup, then you have this young guy. You have this guy who went out there, has worked hard the last couple of years, who won a game for you against the team that went to the Super Bowl. That's more than you could say about Joe Flacco. Joe Flacco's got a better resume. Joe Flacco used to be a good player. Is he a better quarterback than Mike White right now? I'm skeptical of this, and even if he is, I think Mike White deserves a shot, because I don't think you're going anywhere with Joe Flacco starting games for your team. So that's my view on the backup quarterback position. But there still were a couple other moves the Jets made yesterday. They retained a couple of other depth players, and they made a very surprising trade. It's a trade I still can't believe. And we'll talk about that ahead on this Thursday episode of Locked On Jets. This episode is brought to you by Rock Auto. The Jets are trying to fix their team this offseason, and if you're trying to fix your car or truck, go to rockauto.com. Because with the ever-increasing number of makes and models, it's now impossible for your local chain auto parts store to stock all the parts you need. Why endure often pointless or seemingly intimidating questioning, and wait while the person behind the counter orders the parts on their computer, choosing the only brand their warehouse happens to carry? You have computers with access to rockauto.com at home and in your pocket, so save time and money when using Rock Auto. Rock Auto is a family business serving do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years, and their prices are reliably low for every customer. Go explore their easy-to-use website today and find the solution for your auto parts needs. Go to rockauto.com right now and see all the parts available for your car or truck, and write Locked On in their How Did You Hear About Us box so they know we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need, rockauto.com. This is the Locked On Jets podcast on this Thursday. We're talking about the moves the Jets made on Wednesday, and there was one that's just, like, unbelievable. And if you haven't heard about this trade the Jets made yesterday, you may want to sit down, because you're not going to believe who the Jets actually got a draft pick for. And that's Blake Cashman, the late-round pick from 3 years ago, who has played less than 40 snaps on defense the last 2 years because he's been injured so frequently. And this is a guy who's really hasn't played a full season yet in 3 years in the NFL because he's injured so much. The Texans gave up a 6th-round pick for him in 2023. Now, the 6th-round pick's not that valuable, but why would you give him? I mean, let's just put it this way. Amari Cooper, who's a consistent 1,000-yard receiver, and I understand he's got a fairly big contract, but Amari Cooper got a 5th-round pick. The Texans gave up a 6th-round pick for Blake Cashman, who doesn't play, who's always hurt. I mean, it's like one of those things where Did somebody like make a $20? Did somebody make a bet in the Jets facility? $20 Houston will take Blake Cashman for a draft pick because Houston, the entire league has been dunking on Houston's front office the last few years. So maybe it was like that. Maybe it was like somebody was joking around. Hey, I bet Houston will deal for Blake Cashman and give us a pick. I mean, I really need to know what was happening at the Jets facility. Did they have them on speaker? Like, was everybody laughing? Were the Jets were the Jets front office guys giving each other high fives in the background? Like they couldn't believe they pulled this off. The Jets have an extra 6th round pick now. Essentially a 6th round pick that fell out of the sky because they got a 6th round pick for a player who has 0 value. The Texans just pretty much wasted a 6th round pick. It's very difficult to get upset over a 6th round pick, but if you're a Texans fan today, you got to be saying, why did we give up a 6th round pick for a guy who's never on the field? But the Jets benefit from that. So good job, Jets. I mean, I can't get over the fact Blake Cashman got traded. I really need to know what happened. Was there some sort of misunderstanding? I don't know, but Jets got a 6th round pick. So I don't want to go crazy over getting a 6th round pick, but I'd rather have a 6th round pick than not have a 6th round pick, and you got it without really having to do anything. So that was the weirdest moment of the day, but one that works out for the Jets. And then there were some other depth moves that were announced. Connor McDermott, backup offensive lineman, is back, and we knew that from a couple days ago, but his deal was announced. It's a 1-year deal worth $1.5 million, which I would have liked to have seen the Jets upgrade their offensive line depth. Dan Feeney's also back. That one, we don't have the terms on that yet. I thought Feeney played better than I expected last year, so that one is a good deal. Assuming the money's not out of control, because I thought Feeney actually did a good job late in the season when he was called upon. And my new favorite player, Eddie Pinheiro, is also a restricted free agent like Mike White, and the Jets offered him a 1-year contract. This one's worth $2.4 million. I mean, I'm happy Eddie Pinheiro's back. Did the Jets need to give him that much money? The guy who was sitting on his couch in December. I mean, I don't know that they need to give him that much money, but Eddie Pinheiro is back, and I guess I can rejoice. Even though it's, again, I don't want to go crazy. It's $2.4 million, and a cap that's over $200 million, so it's not like it's that big of a deal, but it seems a little odd. But hey, Eddie Pinheiro is back, my new favorite player. So that's the Wednesday the Jets had, and that's all for our show today. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. As always, if you enjoy the show, subscribe to it and leave it a good review. I hope you have a great Thursday, everybody, and we'll be back tomorrow to close out the week.